Welcome to the Bookers Alliance podcast, where we hold the pencil and the pencil is power. Coming at you right now is your host, Marky Mark, along with the man, the myth, the legend, Frank Donaldson. Join us as we discuss the ever-changing landscape of professional wrestling. So hang on tight, you jabronis, and enjoy the ride. Hey, welcome in, everybody. Pull yourself up a ringside seat. Thank you for joining the Bookers Alliance podcast with us today. Today's topic, we are going to talk about some Mount Rushmore topics. We're going to go with the NWA Mt Rushmore Tag Teams. How you doing today, Frank?
Oh, I'm very excited here to talk about some old school wrestling here. NWA Tag Team Wrestling. That's definitely some good times there. So I'm really excited to see how this conversation goes.
So this
History Day. You know I love my history.
Yeah. So everybody that's history nerds, let's listen intently as we go through this episode today, because we're gonna talk about some names you might not have heard of, and if you've heard of them, it's been a long freaking time since you've heard of some of these names. So we'll kick this thing off with our Mount Rushmore. The first one on our mountain has to be the Road Warriors.
The Road Warrior, Hawk and Animal with Precious Paul Ellering coming out there. Definitely a tag team that must be discussed when you're talking about, Mount Rushmore, any tag team conversation. Those two names got to be on there, but in NWA, oh yeah, absolutely.
Yep, and Road Warriors were known for a few things right off the bat. Let me get my best Hawk impression. What a rush!
Oh yeah, there was that. I remember when they started their interview. Well, and it would just go into that. They would just go right into it there. So yeah, Just those two guys. The look, the presence, the look, everything about them was intimidation.
Who did not want a pair of football shoulder pads with spikes coming off of them?
Even in the in the NWA where they had been like the WWE, they colored them and they made them bigger than life and all that. But even in the NWA, when they started it with just the smaller spikes and all that, just the straight black leather vests and the chrome spikes. They looked they looked something just like the Road Warriors movie.
The Road Warriors, Mad Max. Just like that.
They look, but then the guys, like Hawk was huge, and then Animal was bigger. And they looked intimidating. They looked like every bit of whoop your ass. And when people said, "Hey, that's what's going to happen," you didn't doubt it. You believed it. So.
Yep. And when they come out there and that intimidating just look, the face paint, the outfit, and then the music.
Yeah.
Iron Man.
Oh yeah.
Come on. Coming out the Black. No, it was Black Sabbath.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So, you come out to music like that kind of sets the tone right off the bat.
Absolutely.
Your opponent's in the ring looking like, oh God, what did I get myself into?
Yeah, that music starts, that long guitar riff that starts it out, and then it comes into that menacing music. Then you see those two monsters come from behind the curtain. Oh, holy hell. So like a whole lot of ass whooping walking down the road, walking down the aisle right there.
Yep. And then, with those two guys, everybody talks about one thing when you talk about the Road Warriors, and that's the Road Warrior. What?
Rocco?
Rocco.
No. The puppet they used.
We ain't talking about Rocco.
Oh,
no,
damn.
We ain't talking about Rocco.
Oh.
No, we talking about the Road Warrior pop. The biggest pop in wrestling history.
Absolutely.
Everybody, you can't discuss an entrance without, saying, oh my God, that pop was like a Road Warriors pop.
Yeah, well, again, once those guys came from behind the curtain, you just saw a whole world of ass whooping coming down that road there. So if you went to wrestling to see some beat 'em up type wrestling, those guys looked every bit of the part. They didn't shy away from that gimmick. They lived that gimmick one way or the other. So yeah.
And you said a key word a minute ago. You said world. And even though we're talking about NWA, these guys toured around the world, and they were huge in Japan.
Yeah.
Huge. These guys were, the Japanese crowd is not known for making a lot of noise, but even the Road Warrior pop carried over there.
Yeah. So, they were the very first tag team to do that whole, everywhere they went type deal. AWA tag team champions, NWA tag team champions, WWF at the time tag team champions, IWGP tag team champions. everywhere they went, they were immediately saddled up with some belts to carry around in their luggage because, I mean, the look, the pop, just everything about that package was awesome.
Yep. And even though you had two mountains of a man, you had a small little man running with him, Paul Ellery.
I thought you meant Rocco. Yeah, Rocco was a little goddamn.
No, not Rocco.
We're not gonna get a Rocco site. No. We're not gonna get a Rocco conversation going here today, are we?
Nope.
Damn. I tried Rocco. Rocco's rolling over in his little pod box in the sand out there somewhere.
But yeah, Paul Ellery, he was the so-called mastermind behind the group. You know, he didn't have to do much. He just had to wind the story up and then let them go. That's all he had to do.
Yeah, I mean, again, their gimmick, their story, everything was already on the table for them. It was already served up, cooked, and ready. All they had to do was eat. So them two big-ass guys, they could go out there and eat with no problem. So they went out there and ate for 6 minutes a night and called it one.
Yeah. So as a kid, there was two things that I always wanted to do. First one was, even though we're not talking about him right now, paint my face like Sting. The Stinger face paint, the color, the bright colors, the blonde hair. Dude, I so wanted that as a kid.
Yeah.
But then the other thing, I wanted the mohawk. Like Animal. Dude, that mohawk.
You didn't want the split thing?
No, I didn't want the reverse mohawk. I wanted the mohawk.
You wanted the full thing.
Yeah, unfortunately, my mom wouldn't. Yeah, she wasn't going for that.
Especially if she had to pay for it. I mean, ain't no parents go pay for that nonsense.
No, she wasn't going for that. So the closest I got was putting on the Sting face paint at Halloween.
There you go.
I never got to the mohawk, but dude, the haircuts were just phenomenal for back then.
Everything everything they bought in that gimmick. I mean, and it was just simple. Black tights, black boots, a little bit of face paint, and a whole lot of ass whooping. That was a Stone Cold. It ran away with that gimmick later on in his career. But I mean, Goldberg did the same thing. Hey, it's a proven thing. Give me basic. A basic look about you, a little bit of talking, and a whole lot of ass whooping, and hey, you're going to sell some tickets.
Yep. All right, so that was the first on our Mount Rushmore of NWA Tag Teams. We're going to move on to the number 2, the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah, when you talk about NWA Tag Teams, there's nobody else you're going to think of first besides Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson.
Even still this day, them dudes are still going.
Yeah, I mean, good Lord. They sure are. I mean, we saw them live, what was that, 2 years ago? And I mean, they're old. I mean,
they ain't doing too much more in the ring these days. But
there ain't a whole lot of rocking and rolling. I mean, they're more like rockers and rollers, but different setup here. But yeah, they're rocking chairs and and rollators is more what they're on now. But I mean, hey, they're still out there going. And people still pay tickets to go see them. So and that nostalgia factor.
Yep. And when they came out, high octane, high energy. Bright colors, streamers coming off their arms, bright tights, just energy out.
And they were the closest thing a wrestling fan was getting to an actual rock and roll star back in the day then, too. I mean, hell, Chris Jericho's still in there. Look out there. I mean,
Yep.
But so, although I'm not sure if he's competing with them or Randy the Ram. He's actively taking somebody's gimmick right now, doing his whole Fozzy deal, but I mean, hey, Chris Rock, so hey, what can you say? I like Judas, so it must not be all bad. But yeah, as far as the rock and rolls, I mean, the women loved him back then. Ricky Morton was that sympathetic baby face. They weren't big guys, so they were easy to get sympathy for. I mean, just everything worked about that gimmick. I mean, what can you say bad about those guys? There's nothing out there you can say bad about them. They had it all.
Yeah, and then of course they were the blueprint for a non-NWA team that we're talking about NWA right now, but they were the blueprint for the Rockers.
The Rockers and Roll Express, no kidding, right? Or the Midnight Rockers, as the AWA would call them. But yeah, they modeled them right out of that playbook. Said, hey, you guys we got a couple guys over here. They seem to like to party a lot and do a lot of recreational stuff. So we'll tag team them together. And apparently, from what I've heard about old wrestling history, the Midnight Rockers tag team there a lot of people over the years. So some of you listeners out there might be a product of some of that tag teaming. But again, that's biology class. We
won't go there. We got to stay on the PG side.
Yeah, sorry, just speculating. Yeah, rumors and innuendo. Rumors and sexual innuendo are part of our show. What can you say?
So that's team number 2 there on our Mount Rushmore. Let's move on to the greatest foil of the Rock and Roll Express, and that was the Midnight Express.
Well, yeah. I mean, to make a great tag team, you had to have a great couple of dance partners. One tag team can't do it all by themselves. So, I mean, on the flip side, you enter a Jim Cornette-led team of the Midnight Express. That's beautiful Bobby Eaton, sweet Stan Lane, and delicious Dennis Condrey, who we've referenced on the show before. I mean, they went through a few iterations as guys got older, cycle them in, cycle them out. But as long as you kept Jim Cornette there, the Midnight Express was the anti-hero to the Rock and Roll Express. And they peas in a pod.
Yeah, they were the villain. They were the Joker to the Batman.
There you go. They were the jelly to the peanut butter. I mean, they had to go together. You can't have one without the other. Think about it. Just thinking about, old wrestling history. What other feud can you think of that either one of those teams was involved in of any credence?
Yeah, no.
Exactly. There's nobody. They all wrestled everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the Midnight Express wrestled the Road Warriors 100 times. I don't remember not one of those matches. But anytime we think about old school wrestling, the first thing I go to is that match, Rock and Roll Express versus Midnight Express. So that's going to be your tag team there. So if you're going to put one of them on the Mount Rushmore, you got to put the other ones on there right next to them.
Yep. And if anybody gives that old school vibe, and again, we're talking about NWA Mount Rushmore, but got to give, some present day acknowledgement here. If anybody's giving that old school vibe back to the Midnight Express, FTR, they are nailing that retro NWA tag team vibe. The entrance music, the outfits, the all hits, no flips. Yeah.
They're definitely a throwback for sure. I mean, what's crazy is their inspiration is like Tully and Arn, and I will even have Tully and Arn on our Mount Rushmore here. Not to spoil anything for the last entrant, but I mean, for me, they were more of a memorable tag team in WWF as the Brainbusters. In the NWA, they were more Four Horsemen for me.
Right.
You could have, I remember Ole and Arn being the tag team out of that whole thing.
I remember Ole and Arn, and I remember Arn just being the enforcer by himself, and then Tully is the TV champ by himself. That's
exactly.
what I remember.
And then, when they left and came back, Tully wasn't there. So for me, I don't put Tully and Arn in that tag team. Now, if we were talking 80s WWE tag teams, maybe now that's a different discussion. But this one, I don't put them in there. But the Midnight Express, absolutely, they're in there 100% for me.
And then, of course, like we talked about with the Road Warriors, and you've said his name already, Jim Cornette. The Midnight Express is not the Midnight Express without Jim Cornette. No,
that's why they were interchangeable. That's how you could get Stan Lane in so seamlessly when Dennis Condrey cycled out, because at the end of the day, as long as Jim Cornette was there, you already knew. You wanted the Rock and Roll Express to get their hands on Jim Cornette, and they had to get through the Midnights to do it. So, that was the formula.
You had Paul Ellering with the newspaper. You had
the
newspaper.
Okay, all right then.
So
you don't remember Rocco, but you remember him carrying the newspaper.
I'm not acknowledging
Good
Rocco.
Lord, my God, poor Rocco. That guy. That was marketing gold.
You had J.J. Dillon with the shoe.
Yeah.
Jim Cornette had the tennis
racket. Oh, yeah.
Boy, looked like he had never played a game of tennis in his life.
No, absolutely not. I don't even know if that was a tennis racket in there. He always had the cover on it. So,
right.
Yeah, that could have been just a loaded bat that he had in there for all we know. But he made it look like a tennis racket, so he gimmicked it up enough.
Yeah, so got to include him in the Midnight Express. So let's move on to the last of our Mount Rushmore of NWA tag teams, and that is...
This one's going to shock you. Be ready. Get ready, guys.
The Fabulous Freebirds.
The Freebird, absolutely. You got to give those guys their credit. I mean, they were NWA six-man tag team champions. They invented the Freebird rule that the New Day exploited so much here in more recent times, with being able to have any guy of the faction defend the title. One night it could be Michael P.S. Hayes and Buddy Roberts. The next night it could be Terry Bam Bam Gordy and Michael Hayes. Or later on after, a second iteration of them was actually Michael P.S. Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin. I mean, you interchange the tag team champions over, amongst those guys, and whoever was up to wrestle that night defended them. I mean, there's a whole rule named after them that we're still talking about here in, the 21st century. So if nothing else, they definitely left their mark there. But Also, I mean, they wrestled all those teams that we just talked about. You know,
Yep.
they competed against all those other guys, and they were able to achieve a lot of success against those guys. So, you know, for me, that earns them a spot.
So when they started, do you remember who was their biggest rivals when they first started? Do you remember that?
When they first started wrestling,
Yeah.
So not NWA
No, this
based.
would've
They
been in
started
Texas.
WCCW. They were the Von Erichs,
Von Erichs,
foil
yeah.
there. You know, all the Von Erich brothers, you know, they fought all the Freebirds. And, you know, it was just the back and forth thing. That was they were the Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express equivalent in WCCW.
Yep.
So, and you know, they made their name there. They carved out their little niche. They made their name there. They tried to venture up to Connecticut, up to New York, and apparently from stories that have been told, they had one night there where the Freebirds went up there.
Yep.
Apparently they wrestled a dark match, went out that night and partied as hard as they could. Didn't come to work the next day, just didn't show up. And we know how Vince McMahon reacts to something like that. He told me, well, they didn't come to work today. Well, then they don't work here no more. And that was the end of the Freebirds run in wrestling in all of WWF until Doc Hendricks came up, you know, many, many moons later. But all that's a different story for a different podcast.
I mean, Michael Hayes eventually landed behind the scenes with WWE.
Yeah.
And to hear
He's a contributor now.
Yeah, to hear some of the stories, he's been a pivotal part of
still
a lot of the stories that we've seen play out on our TV.
So yeah, his wrestling mind was always there, but I mean, as far as the work rate, you know, back in the he was definitely the mouthpiece of that group. He wasn't the best worker out of the four Freebirds we talked about, that's for sure, but he was a damn good mouthpiece.
So a couple things that I just remembered about Michael P.S. Hayes.
Uh-oh.
So all I remember back in the day, I remember the big blonde hair and the massive amount of man sweater that he carried, the big hairy chest. That dude, I mean, he had that chest hair on Pop and Circumstance. I mean, he was going for
that
it.
dude was a fur ball and a half, that's for sure.
But then Jimmy Jam, I remember that big curl, that Jerry curl and the hairspray going on. And then who was with him? What female valet was with him? Was it Baby Doll?
No, Baby Doll was a dream guy. You're talking about Precious. Yeah, Precious came down. Precious came with Jimmy Jam. And she kind of got in the Freebirds for a little bit. But, I mean, so the Freebirds have also, you know, speaking about their mark on history and whatnot, they were the very first wrestlers to come to the ring to music.
Oh, they were,
Yeah, when Michael Hayes and them recorded Bad Street USA. I mean, had they not done that, we still may not have entrance music today. So, I mean, They're definitely they made a landmark achievement by doing that, because I mean they changed the wrestling business as a whole by introducing that. I mean, you know, when that happened, it was strange, it was different, everybody wasn't a fan of it. But I mean, look at it now. How many wrestlers do you only know because of their entrance music? You know, there's guys that may have never actually got there had they not had that entrance music. Now you hear the first chord of someone. John Cena, when he came back right before WrestleMania, you heard that first little trumpet play, and I mean, you know, the crowd erupted. You know, the roof was blown off the building. And what did we just talk about? You know, the Road Warriors entrance music, how much of a part of their gimmick that was. Could you imagine if they didn't have it? I mean, yeah, they were still two big badass guys, and you know, they still brought a whole lot of whoop ass, but the energy that music created, you know, really set the tone for what they were going to bring. And without that, they're just two big ass guys walking to the ring. I mean, so hey, if so, for those of you out there who are thinking the Freebirds, how the hell? If you're still trying to figure out how they got on the Mount Rushmore, there's your contribution right there. That if nothing else, that would have solidified it for me.
Yeah. So let's play a pop quiz. I'm gonna give our wrestling historian here a pop quiz. So Frank, I'm gonna spring this on you.
Well, you did that in the pre-show, trying to hit me with stuff here.
So here we go. Pop quiz. Jimmy Jam Garvin.
Yeah.
Who's his brother?
Rugged Roddy Garvin.
Look at
Hands of Stone.
Look
Rugged
at that
Roddy
wrestling
Garvin.
historian over there.
The creator of the Stomp. So
there you go.
Randy Orton, who we see doing the Stomp today, Rugged Roddy Garvin he created that. Now he was the first one to actually do that and call it the Stomp.
Dude, I was a huge Ronnie Garvin fan back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why I was enamored with him, but I loved his character, man.
So I don't either. I mean, I was listening to Ric Flair's podcast. You know, we talk about all the different podcasts we listen to, and they were going over when Ronnie Garvin won the world title for Ric Flair, won the big gold off for Ric Flair. And, you know, they just kind of asked Rick, like, hey, why didn't it work out? And and Rick said, well, Ronnie didn't connect with the fans. I mean, he was just a big, he's just a badass dude that could come out there and, beat the hell out of you. But as far as like charisma and all that other, he had none of that. Yeah. So the fact that you say you are a mark for Ronnie Garvin, my goodness, you are a rugged rebel there back in the day.
Matter of fact, dude, I popped so hard the first time I saw Randy Orton do that stomp.
Oh my!
I was like, oh my God, I know who that's from.
So I mean, so I knew who it was from when I saw it too. So speaking of him, I got some trivia for you. What did he bring to the Greg Valentine feud that made that whole feud very memorable?
No clue.
No clue. Awesome. So back then, I'm glad you brought it up now. See, you tested me and I passed. I tested you. You failed with flying colors. But no, in that feud, that's when Greg Valentine had that little shin guard that he was using, and he would always turn it around and put the figure four on people. Then all of a sudden, Ronnie Garvin had a shin guard of his own. Yep. That was the figure four blocker that they called it. I can remember in a match, Ronnie Garvin was making Google faces and Greg Valentine in the figure four and all that. And then they realized he had the figure four blocker on his leg. And I mean, it was Vince McMahon. This was a WWE feud, of course, for those of you who aren't familiar, but they were just trying to find something that would make Ronnie Garvin, appeal to kids and the young viewer that they were targeting at the time. And I mean, it just didn't work. And, nothing was. Ronnie Garvin was just an old, beat him up kind of guy. He was like Harley Race. He was cut from that cloth.
His hair and his face, it always made him look older.
Yeah, I mean, he was cut from that same cloth as Harley Race. And I mean, Harley Race was never going to be a guy that the kids in WWF at the time were going to be like all behind. Harley may have been one of the greatest in-ring workers of all time, but when he came to WWF, they made him the king and made him a bad guy and knew right away he wasn't going to, relate to any kids, and Ronnie Garvin was just that same thing. They tried because he was a face, but they couldn't make that connection. So, after that Greg Valentine feud, Ronnie was not too long for that world over in WWF.
Yep. So everybody, that kind of builds out our NWA Mount Rushmore for tag teams. What do you think? How did we do? What grade would you give us on our report card? And if you got a better tag team than what we've put out there, hit us up on social media. Tell us what your thoughts are. Who would you have put on that Mount Rushmore? Hey, you can always push the mountain over and build another face. Who would it be?
80s NWA tag teams. I mean, it's definitely a wild topic. I mean, anybody, Powers of Pain were there at that time. People might like the, you don't know. Depending on how far into the 80s, Doom was there for a time. Yep. I mean, Doom for me was more 90s. That's the only reason they're not on the list. Steiner Brothers, they were more 90s. That's the only reason they aren't on the list.
Harlem Heat 90s.
Yeah, so there's a world of tag teams that we definitely could have talked about as far as the NWA/WCW history. But just to limit it to the 80s, we gave you our best contingent here. So if you got something better, go ahead and let us know. Shout them out.
Yep. And with that, everybody, we thank you for joining us today, listening to the Bookers Alliance podcast, and we bid you adieu.
Peace.
Today's podcast was produced by SBP. You can find our podcast on all major podcast platforms. Also connect with us on our social media accounts. Search for the Bookers Alliance on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.